There are growing calls for more sanctions and a war crimes investigation into Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Ukraine is accusing Russia of killing hundreds of civilians in a town near Kyiv. CBS News' Deborah Alfarone has more, but we warn you, some of the images in this report.
Something slipped out of Russia that was never meant to be seen. 12 illegal photographs, smuggled through layers of surveillance, cut straight through the government's polished facade. In one frame, a billion-dollar palace buried in silence.
Alexei Navalny's investigation into what he calls Putin's palace on Russia's Black Sea coast.
In another, frozen ghost towns that officials swear don't exist. Together they expose a hidden Russia, one built on wealth, fear, and erasure. And what these images captured is far more terrifying than the state ever intended you to know. Number 12. The Black Sea Estate.
Black Sea and to a sprawling palace complex. The video was posted by Navalny's team 2 days after he was jailed upon returning to Russia.
In early 2021, a video surfaced on YouTube with a force Russia never saw coming. Made by Alexei Navalny and his anti-corruption foundation, it dragged viewers straight into a world officials had spent years trying to seal off. The documentary ran nearly 2 hours, but its length only amplified its impact. Within a week, it passed 100 million views. Soon it climbed beyond 130 million, becoming impossible to contain or discredit. At the heart of the investigation stood a massive private compound near the quiet village of Praskovevka, close to the Black Sea shoreline by Gelendzhik.
Putin was rich or is rich, and despite social media discussions right now, as someone who has betrayed his country and wants to weaken Russia.
Navalny's team estimated its construction and furnishing cost nearly 100 billion rubles, around $1.35 billion at the time. The residence alone covered more than 190,000 square feet, while the surrounding land formed a fortified stretch of restricted territory where ordinary access simply stopped. According to the Foundation's findings, the grounds held a church, an open-air theater, a greenhouse the size of a warehouse, vineyards, an ice training facility, and even a hidden tunnel carved through a cliff that led down to the water. Inside the main structure were marble pools, sculptures of ancient deities, and golden double-headed eagles glowing across the walls. The entire area operated under heavy security. Flight restrictions and land boundaries locked off from the public. Navalny's team released nearly 500 photos showing the interior in striking detail. On paper, this billion-dollar estate belonged to a maze of shell companies. But using those leaked images and tracing financial networks, the Foundation argued the true owner was Putin himself, funded by a vast system of loyalist bribes. The Kremlin dismissed every claim as fiction. Yet the photographs told a story far harder to wave away. They ignited large street protests across Russia, turning digital evidence into a real-world crisis.
He was opposition leaders because he didn't have personal ambitions.
In the weeks following the video's release, protests erupted in dozens of Russian cities. Thousands were detained for demanding answers about who funded the palace. The images showed more than a palace. They threatened an entire hierarchy of power.
This was the first protest of this magnitude in Russia in 6 years.
Number 11. The city Russia tries to hide. There is a city near the edge of the Arctic that almost never appears in the news, a place where the air stings more than it sustains.
Today, a tragic incident occurred in the southeast district of Moscow.
This is Norilsk, a remote northern settlement in Russia where pollution reaches levels that feel unreal even when measured. Scientists have tracked it for years, and their data reveals the same grim truth. The yearly average concentration of sulfur dioxide rises far beyond any acceptable limit, sometimes reaching 10 to 30 times what experts call safe. Anyone who studies satellite images from NASA's Landsat program or Sentinel-2 sees the scars spreading across the terrain. Forests that once stood thick and dark now appear washed out and broken. A dead zone stretches for several thousand square miles, its vegetation weakened by acid rain and heavy metals settling into the soil. Within roughly 18 miles of the giant smelting plants, full-sized trees have almost vanished. Instead, the ground is scattered with small, failing birch trees that look as if they are surrendering to the weight of the air around them. Norilsk began as a Soviet mining base and grew into one of the most industrialized locations in the far north. Gulag prisoners built the city in the 1930s and 1940s. Today, approximately 175,000 people remain, many because Norilsk Nickel offers wages significantly higher than elsewhere in Russia to compensate for extreme conditions. The city became tightly linked to Norilsk Nickel, a massive producer of valuable metals. But the progress that built the region carried a heavy environmental cost. For decades, thick emissions from smelting rose into the sky and settled onto rivers and frozen ground, slowly breaking the balance of the surrounding ecosystems. Even the Daldikan River shifts colors at times. Residents have watched it turn a deep red as nickel and copper compounds leak into the water from nearby industrial sites. The sight alarms the world whenever images surface, yet the cycle continues as long as production keeps driving forward. Number 10. What happened after Navalny's death? In the cold weeks following the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny in February 2024, a silent battle played out on the streets. Mourners gathered at impromptu memorials where they held simple printed portraits of the man who was Vladimir Putin's most prominent critic.
Across the world, demonstrators mourned dead Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny from the Russian embassy in Washington.
In response, Russian authorities launched a systematic campaign. Officers selectively searched people in the crowds and pulled photographs of Navalny from coat pockets and bags. They took notes that bore his name. They did not just monitor the gatherings, they actively dismantled them by sweeping away flowers and portraits which were left at monuments dedicated to victims of political repression. People said the searches felt targeted. It was almost as if the aim was to erase any sign that he had meant something to those who came to honor him. The act of carrying his image became a direct offense. In Moscow, 2 men were arrested after police found photographs of Navalny in a backpack near a memorial. Across the nation, hundreds were detained simply for the crime of peaceful mourning. OVD Info, an independent monitoring group, documented over 400 detentions across Russia, specifically for carrying Navalny's photograph or flowers. The crackdown extended to the press. One of the only remaining independent newspapers, Sobosednik, published an issue with Navalny's picture on the front page. Authorities responded by confiscating almost every copy from distribution points in the capital. This was not merely about maintaining order, it was an effort to control reality. When videos and photos of these confiscations reached the outside world, human rights groups like Amnesty International condemned the actions.
When Putin was elected president, Navalny had moved successfully from the virtual world to the real world of protest.
They called on the state to end what they labeled an insensitive campaign and to release those detained merely for wanting to remember. These scenes formed a stark visual record of a state so threatened by a photograph that it would deploy its power to seize it from the hands of its own citizens. Number 9. The frozen prisons Russia concealed. Hidden among old archives in Russia are photographs from prison camps scattered across the far reaches of Siberia, places the government tried to keep out of view for many years. These camps had been created in the early 1930s, during Joseph Stalin's rule, and anyone who was accused of resisting the state could be forced into them. People from different backgrounds ended up there, including farmers, teachers, and anyone who said something that officials disliked. Many were sent to isolated regions where the cold cut through clothing and made each hour feel longer. Temperatures often dropped below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and prisoners were pushed into mining, logging, and heavy construction. Historians later reviewed records released between 1989 and 1991, along with research from groups like Memorial, and they reached a staggering count. They concluded that around 18 to 20 million people had passed through the network of labor camps and colonies between the early 1930s and the mid-1950s. The system stretched across the Soviet Union, but the Siberian sites remained the most feared. Some camps became known by name long after they closed. Kolyma gained a dark reputation for its severe winters, while Vorkuta grew around a massive coal operation. Conservative estimates point to more than 1.5 million verified deaths during those years. Photographs from the camps were strictly forbidden. The few images that survived were smuggled out by released prisoners or taken secretly. These photos remained classified until the late 1980s. Life inside these places was shaped by hunger, sickness, and shelters that barely held together. Illness spread quickly since medical supplies were scarce. Other camps in Norilsk, And along the old Salakard to Igarka Railway, a route often called the Dead Road, saw some of the worst losses due to the cold. Officials managed to hide these realities for decades. But once survivors began sharing what they experienced, and once restricted photographs surfaced, the truth became harder to bury. Museums now stand where the camps once operated, and they try to guard the memory of those who endured conditions that few people today can imagine. Number 8. The underground life beneath Moscow. Moscow gleams with modern towers and busy streets, a city of power and wealth. But directly beneath the feet of its residents exists another world which the authorities would prefer stayed hidden. A network of forgotten tunnels and Soviet-era bunkers, originally built for military secrecy, now serves as a last refuge for those with nowhere else to go. Photos taken in this shadow city, images not meant for public eyes, show a reality far from the official surface. These underground spaces are immense. Some historical civil defense bunkers plunge over 200 feet down. The areas where people actually live, however, are usually found 50 to 100 feet below street level. Moscow has an estimated homeless population in the tens of thousands, though exact counts are difficult as authorities don't systematically track them. Life there is defined by cold, damp air and constant tension. People construct fragile living spaces from scraps with their belongings scattered along concrete corridors. The walls are covered in layers of graffiti, and the stale smell of old fires used for warmth hangs in the still air. City patrols regularly descend to clear out these makeshift homes. Since the middle of the last decade, officials have welded doors shut and poured concrete plugs to seal entrances. With strict laws on homelessness and very few shelters available, the underground network remains the only option for many. The photographs from this hidden layer are more than documentation. They are a direct challenge. They show narrow passages leading to forgotten rooms and capture the faces of those who have formed fragile communities out of sight. These photos, Russia does not want you to see, expose the human consequence of policy, a stark contrast playing out in the darkness below the capital's shining surface. Number 7. Photos from the submarine graveyards. Russia hides a secret beneath its frozen waters and rugged coastlines. In the Murmansk region and near Vladivostok, entire fleets of decommissioned Soviet submarines sit abandoned, some powered by nuclear reactors. Time and neglect have turned these vessels into rusting skeletons. Once symbols of power, they now drift in decay, creating an unseen threat. The sites are officially restricted military zones, guarded and off-limits, making any photograph taken there a risky glimpse into a state secret. Yet from the sea, observers can sometimes see the terrifying scale of this neglect. The reason for this dangerous abandonment is a story of collapsed empires and vanished funding. When the Soviet Union dissolved, the new Russian Navy inherited a monstrous problem. They suddenly possessed hundreds of outdated submarines, but lacked the enormous financial resources needed to safely dismantle them and store their radioactive parts. The cost was simply too high. So the easiest, most tragic solution was to do nothing. The submarines were towed to these remote locations and left to decay. Hundreds of submarines were abandoned, some still containing highly radioactive fuel. Their neglect turned into a ticking environmental time bomb. The once mighty Cold War fleet, intended to project power, now threatens the Arctic in ways few imagine. The environmental danger is real. The spent fuel and deteriorating reactors aboard these submerged or rotting submarines carry the potential for a radiation disaster that could unfold slowly yet relentlessly. Experts warn that what lies beneath the frozen waters could become a slow-motion Chernobyl, silently leaking radiation for decades. The photographs that emerge from these forbidden zones show more than just rusting metal. They document a lingering and invisible threat, a radioactive debt from the past that the present has yet to pay. Number 6. Secret photos from Sevastopol shipyard. Before officials could control the narrative, the truth leaked out. A series of explosions had ripped through a major Russian naval yard in occupied Crimea, and the photos that slipped into the open told the story the press releases didn't dare touch. In those images, the Rostov-na-Donu submarine and the Minsk landing ship sat exposed in dry dock, each carrying damage too severe to spin away. The strike hit before dawn on the 13th of September 2023, when multiple missiles slammed into the yard in rapid succession. From the first reports, one fact stood out. This was one of the hardest blows the Black Sea Fleet had taken since the war began. Ukrainian sources carefully hinted that long-range Western cruise missiles might have been used. Names like Storm Shadow and Scalp surfaced in those early whispers. Nothing was confirmed, which only deepened the sense that something larger was unfolding behind the scenes. Russian officials pushed back instantly through state media, insisting the two ships had suffered only minor harm and would soon return to duty. That line collapsed fast. As the leaked photos spread, denial became impossible. Smoke drifted over the dry docks, burn marks stained the structures. Sections of the hulls looked torn and misshapen, damage that no optimistic briefing could smooth over. Open-source investigators began dissecting the evidence frame by frame. Satellite angles, terrain matching, and image comparisons built a clearer picture than any official statement. And when sharper photos emerged days later, the scale of the strike settled into plain view. The attack had cut deep into Russia's naval presence in the Black Sea and pierced Moscow's attempt to project steady, unshaken control. Number 5. Putin's secret train network. People who follow Russian politics often point out how little is known about Vladimir Putin's movements. His routines stay so hidden that even officials inside the country rarely agree on where he is at any moment. Yet over the years, a different pattern began to take shape, hinting at a travel system almost no one ever sees. It centers on a fleet of trains described as custom-made, built to let him cross long stretches of Russia without drawing attention. According to investigations by Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation, evidence suggests a private train network exists.
The media outlet has found out at least 3 locations that may be associated with Putin's secret railway service.
While the Kremlin denies these claims, leaked photos and railway worker accounts support the reporting. One train in particular gained a reputation for carrying several linked cars designed around comfort and privacy. Investigators claimed it held a private workspace, a sleeping cabin, and a fitness room with a treadmill and free weights. Some who studied the system said it could reach nearly 125 miles per hour, though they noted that safety concerns usually kept it below 100. According to those same sources, Putin used these trains more often after the attack on the Crimean Bridge in 2022. The strike raised fresh fears about threats to his aircraft, making a quieter mode of travel more appealing. Journalists and political critics argued that the trains existed to shield his movements while preserving the luxury he prefers during long journeys. They also described security measures far stronger than what most Russian officials ever receive. Interior photos that leaked online showed armored sections, gold-colored bathroom fixtures, deep wood paneling, and special communication rooms. The Kremlin dismissed the claims and said critics were twisting facts for political gain. Still, several investigations concluded that a private railway network likely operates behind the scenes for discreet travel across the country.
A rare glimpse inside Putin's secret train.
Number 4. Putin's hidden family. Some of the most sought-after photographs in Russia are not of military sites, but of 2 women whose lives are a national secret. Vladimir Putin has spent years building a wall around his private life, and the silence surrounding his family has created a steady pull of curiosity. For a long time, the public has relied on outside investigations to connect pieces of information about 2 women believed to be his children. Reports point to Maria Vorontsova, born in 1985, and Katerina Tikhonova, born in 1986. Their mother, Lyudmila Putina, once worked as a flight attendant before marrying him in 1983 when he served in the KGB. Their relationship eventually ended, and after nearly 3 decades together, the separation became official. The announcement aired live in June 2013, and the legal process concluded in April the following year. Maria is described as someone who pursued biology at St. Petersburg State University before studying medicine at Moscow State University. She is said to be involved in endocrinology. Katerina's path took her into science and business. She served in senior roles at Innopractica along with a research institute connected to complex systems. She once competed in acrobatic rock and roll. Around 2022 into 2023, she faded from public view. Both women stay away from attention, and almost everything known about them comes from reporters who have spent years trying to trace the pieces Putin refuses to speak about. During a press event in December 2015, he explained that his children were raised in Russia and spoke several languages, yet he made it clear that he does not talk about them in public. He said every person deserves the freedom to live the path set before them, and he mentioned that his daughters followed their own direction with dignity. Number 3. the lake that could kill in an hour. Hidden inside the Ural Mountains in western Russia sits a lake that once carried a danger most people could not imagine. Lake Karachay, positioned near the closed city of Ozorsk, was tied directly to one of the Soviet Union's most secret nuclear programs. For many years, the nearby Mayak Production Association used the quiet water as a dumping ground for the waste created during plutonium production. Beginning in the early 1950s, barrels and pipes released heavy streams of contaminated liquid straight into the lake, and over time the water turned into a toxic pool that no one could safely approach. Old photographs that survived from those years show dark pipes pushing waste into the surface. Investigations later revealed that between 1949 and 1956, close to 120 million curies of high-level radioactive waste had been poured into the open lake. To put that into perspective, the amount surpassed what was released during Chernobyl. As the years passed, the danger multiplied. By the early 1960s, anyone who stood on the shore for even a single hour risked receiving a dose strong enough to cause death. The land around the lake absorbed the contamination, and the effects spread outward into nearby forests and small settlements. A series of nuclear accidents at Mayak made the situation even worse. Officials eventually ordered evacuations in surrounding communities. The lake became so hazardous that it could not be left open. In the period that followed, workers covered the entire surface with heavy concrete to trap the danger beneath the earth. The site remains sealed, closed to visitors, and serves as a stark record of how far the Cold War pushed environmental limits in the name of nuclear power. Number 2. Russia's frozen ghost towns. In 2021, under the heavy Arctic sky of northern Russia, a photographer named Maria Passer spent close to 3 weeks moving through towns that most people will never reach. The cold around Vorkuta settles into every surface, and the silence grows deeper the farther you travel from the main roads. She focused on places with names that once meant something to thousands of workers. Towns like Yurshor, Promyshleny, Sementno-Zavodsky, Kalmeryu, Severny, Oktyabrski, and the abandoned settlement known as Kalmeryu. Long ago, nearly 7,000 people lived in Kalmeryu, but now the land has been claimed by the military as a bombing range. The climate in this region is so severe that entire blocks look as if they were frozen in midlife. Wind pushes through cracked windows and spreads frost across rooms where simple objects still lie where their owners left them. Tables, worn chairs, and small belongings sit under layers of ice that formed over years. These towns once depended on coal mines that kept the region alive, and many of those sites first came to life between the 1930s and the 1950s. Gulag labor built much of the early settlement around the Vorkuta coal basin. Everything changed after the Soviet Union collapsed. Mines that could no longer make profit shut down and government support dried up. As a result, the population of the entire municipality dropped sharply. In 1989, close to 250,000 people lived there. Today, the number sits closer to 50,000, leaving behind long rows of empty apartments and cold stairwells that echo when the wind moves through. Passer's photographs capture both the calm and the unsettling silence of these frozen interiors, and her work has been exhibited internationally. Russian authorities have demolished some abandoned settlements in recent years. Officials cite safety concerns, though critics argue it prevents documentation of the region's widespread economic decline. Now, the authorities rarely acknowledge what these images reveal. In recent years, some entrances to the abandoned towns have been sealed or torn down. This was done to discourage explorers and to hide how widespread the abandonment has become. Number 1. The Bucha evidence Russia called fake. In the spring of 2022, after Russian forces pulled back from a small town near Kiev called Bucha, a hidden horror was uncovered.
Hundreds of Ukrainians died there, many apparently executed by Russian troops as they retreated from the town last week.
Ukrainian soldiers and journalists entered to find the streets filled with a terrible silence which was broken only by the chilling sight of hundreds of dead civilians. Many were discovered with their hands bound tightly behind their backs.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bodies in this tiny room in this basement where Ukrainians say
each had a single gunshot wound to the head. These were not casualties of battle. They were executions, clear and systematic, left in the open as a brutal message. Moscow's response was immediate and unwavering denial. Official statements from the Russian Ministry of Defense labeled the entire scene a gross fabrication. According to them, It was a staged provocation engineered by Ukraine and the West. They insisted their troops had already left when these deaths occurred and that the world was being deceived by propaganda. But then, a different kind of proof emerged, and it was one that could not be argued away. Images from commercial satellites showed bodies lying along the same roads weeks earlier when Russian forces still controlled the town. These overhead photographs revealed that the victims had not been placed there after the withdrawal. The images captured the town in different conditions, including cloudy days and clearer ones, which made it easy to compare the landscape over time. In the end, the satellite records supported the accounts gathered on the ground, breaking apart the claims that everything had been staged after the occupation ended. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.